folks. I just wanted to follow up on our group conferences this week about feedback and noticing kind of general themes and patterns across people's methods and results sections. So I thought it might be helpful to post just a quick video giving some suggestions that cover the majority of students in our class. So one of the biggest things in the method section was just making sure you are as detailed as you can be. It's almost being more detailed than you think you should be. So remember, somebody should be able to read your method section and replicate exactly what you did for your study. And that means doing things as specific as listing out when you actually conducted your interviews. So this example is from the one we looked at in class about psychedelics. And so she did some interviews and she talked about the days that she did it. How did she do it? On Zoom. Her interviewees didn't mind being named, so she has included their names and their credentials here as well. If your interviewees want to be anonymous for some reason, this is a place where you would talk about interviews remained anonymous, and it might be helpful to give them some pseudonyms as well. She continues on, and you would want to do this in your survey as well, about being specific in how long your surveys lasted, how long your interviews lasted, how long your observations lasted. So she talks here about her interviews were approximately 30 minutes. She gives a brief kind of summary of the types of questions she asked. And then this is what a lot of folks forgot to do. And I think it's because you've just started doing your analysis, but be really specific about how you coded your data. So interview transcripts need to be coded. Qualitative survey data, so open-ended questions, need to have some type of coding and analysis. Quantitative data can be calculated and analyzed through Qualtrics with descriptive statistics. So you want to be specific. Even the type of coding you do, be specific. We talked about two types in class, inductive and deductive, so I would expect to see that there as well. As far as the results section, folks generally, I thought, were doing a really good job at reporting their results. I think there were some kind of struggling with how do you report enough detail, but not too much detail. And I would say the more detail, the better, because you can always take stuff out later. But when you get to writing your discussion section, if you don't have stuff mentioned in your results, then you can't discuss it. So we want to make sure that anything that is of note that is going to come up in your discussion section has to be recorded in your results section. For interview data, there are different ways to present your results. The majority of researchers will give brief summaries of each interview that they do. And so this student tried to kind of summarize the major themes that she found in the interview. So she talks about giving psychedelics, he described the importance of, and again, you want to try to remain as neutral as possible and just recount exactly what the interviewee said. For survey data, I would expect to see demographics first. So you always want to describe the demographics that you have collected, your population breakdown, and any other demographics that are important. Age, where they're from, year in school, gender, all of that stuff should come first for surveys. Now I'm switching to a different example. This one did a mixed method survey, and because so many students in our class did a survey, I think it's important to look at how results are reported in that context. So one thing that a lot of folks neglected to do was use the abbreviations uppercase N and lowercase n for their populations and subpopulations. So you want to make sure that it is clear what you are referring to. So here, when she gets to the point about the remaining participants, N equals 34, I know that her overall population for the survey was 34. She also decided to use subpopulations, N equals 33, N equals 1, N equals 32. So this shows people not only the percentages, but the total number, the numerical value of each of those populations. Typically with surveys, we expect to see demographic data first. So if you have your demographic questions and the results from that, you definitely want to present those first. Your choice after that kind of depends on how you want to lay out your data. Most people, especially if it's a mixed methods survey, will start with the quantitative data first and then get into the qualitative data at the end as you're leading into your discussion. You don't have to do it that way, but that tends to be the most common way to organize it. And the other thing to think about with interviews and observations are similarly, right? Do you want to report each of your interviews separately, so summarizing one interview and then summarizing another interview, or do you want to kind of zoom out and look at themes and break down your results based on themes? There's no one right way to do it. It kind of depends on your methods and what makes sense with your data. Another common theme of feedback I feel like I was giving was about using descriptive stats. So you don't have to report descriptive stats like mean and standard deviation for every piece of data. Percentages and numerical values do a lot of work and can be great. But especially when you're reporting Likert scale questions, anything where people are having to rate their experiences or beliefs on a scale, it can be really helpful. So you'll notice here, she has a question of Likert scale, and she does give the subpopulations for each answer that reported, but at the end, she talks about what the average score was and what the standard deviation is. This helps readers because this standard deviation is pretty low, so it shows that most of the answers were pretty similar there. Again, she does it down here again for another Likert scale. She gives the mean and the standard deviation. Don't forget to italicize your abbreviations, M, SD, N. Yeah, that's just something that you have to do for APA. And then for tables, I know not every student included a table for this draft, but I highly recommend including at least one table, especially if you have some data that is kind of your most interesting, most powerful data that you want to talk about in your discussion. Some things to think about with figures. So whenever you have a figure, make sure you label it. So figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, table 1, table 2, table 3, and then some type of title that helps the reader understand what is being shown. The title typically goes on top of the figure or the table. You should always refer to your figures in text as well, and the figure should come after that first reference. This is for a lot of reasons, but the main reason is for accessibility. So if someone is using an e-reader, if they are visually impaired, the e-reader will refer to the visual before the visual comes up. So something to think about there. You may need to add a note about your table or figure if it's not immediately clear what the axes are, but think about trying to make the axes as clear as possible. There's no kind of optimal number for figures. You want to think about, does your figure make sense? So don't just throw a figure in there to have one. And some people might only have one figure or one table. Other people might have 3 or 4, just depending on how their data broke down and what makes sense. In this example, I think she has 3 or 4 tables in here, and she's used different ones. She's used bar graphs, but also line graphs as well. So yeah, she's got quite a few, 5. Yeah, so hopefully this is helpful in kind of like the main things that we're looking for in the methods and the results sections. If you have any specific questions about your paper, please reach out to me. And I look forward to seeing your discussions next week.